So welcome to District 4, to the point with information and news. I'm your host, A-Love. We're kind of going to talk top trials to track, but before I get onto that, I'm going to talk about some other things that we need to cover as far as news. We're really going to cover West Virginia versus NATALIE Cochran. Now, I am so glad when I discover a trial or someone turns me on to a trial, and it has sort of these elements that are like complex. They're my favorites to analyze because as much as you may know going into the trial, you're never quite certain what's going to happen once you get in there. We're already in the midst of this trial, so I'll go over a little bit of what this case is about, some of the back history. Back history is a little more interesting, even so, than most of the trials we actually do. But before I get started, make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. I'm going to cover this whole TikTok scenario. So a lot of people, TikTok went dark. Had those experiences. Everybody was zeroed out, and it was back up the next day. Everyone looking and waiting for this sort of 90-day extension and possible working out the problems that TikTok faces, because the owner of TikTok is also friends with the president. The president now in office, not the one prior to, but the one in office now, actually, staked the claim that they won their campaign partly with the help of TikTok and having that account there. Now, let's get a reality check. In real life, while the president can recommend and they can do certain things to aid in their knowledge and support of TikTok, the law basically is a bundled law. So it is legal, and the federal courts are the ones that really mandate that, unless there's some sort of executive override by the president, which I don't think he'll take the time to do that at all. But he can, do the 90 days. And even with the 90 days, you can see now if you go to try to download the TikTok app, you actually cannot. If you go to try to update the app that you have, you cannot. So if you can kind of understand that this is more legal than it is whether or not it's supported by most individuals, it actually was supported. I have to say, though, in reality, the ban, according to the federal courts, as of to date, happens. It not only happens, but it did happen, which gives you about 6 months before you have to actually update this app and realize you're not able to do that. People are riding it till the wheels fall off. That's perfectly fine. I personally went to a newer app. There's Instagram, there's YouTube. I always have my YouTube channel as I grow that. But I also tried something called FANBASE. And that's where you will find newer content from me out behind the scenes, is what I call it, from what I do here on YouTube. My TikTok blew up pretty fast, and it did really well. My first two YouTube channels really did carry over, although this channel hasn't been around that long by itself. So, but I was remembered from TikTok and from those other channels. So I just hope to transfer that to YouTube and to the app called FANBASE. Not heard of yet. It's probably new to you. Go ahead and take a chance if you get a chance to look it up. I am a business person, so I think it's good when you try to get on the ground floor of certain things or things that are newer. I like to promote, things that are not already up and running. I mean, it's up and running, but not all, the most popular solution would have probably just been to go to Instagram or Lemon8 or, stick to YouTube, which I probably will do primarily. But I just didn't. I took I took the road less traveled, shall we say. Let's see if it'll make all the difference, but we'll see how, as time moves on. Still a possibility that they can save TikTok. And I think everybody's hoping with more time, TikTok will actually be just a regular functioning app here in the U.S. So. All right, side note, I had to talk about that real quick. I also have to talk on a side note about Starbucks. So years ago, some of you may or may not remember that Starbucks had this policy that you had to purchase something if you came in there. Well, it ran into racial problems because it was never exercised prior to an incident that happened. I believe it was in 2012. Approximately, don't quote me because I'm going from memory, but around this time we had a Starbucks had an incident where some gentlemen were in there. They happened to be African, not African American, but African, maybe Haitian, but they were in this store and they hadn't made a purchase, and the staff took that or used that, it was felt, as an opportunity to sort of vent into some racist views, which had nothing to do with the policy. Starbucks at the time pretended, oh, we care about people. We are going to open up a group of diversification classes that our employees will have to take, and we're going to renege that policy because if it's going to be abused, then we are not going to use it, and therefore you can come in there, use the Wi-Fi, and not have to purchase something. Well, let's fast forward to now. And Starbucks is now reinstating that policy that if you're in Starbucks, you do have to purchase something. This goes straight to the heart of investing in finances because Starbucks, like many places that are pleasure type institutions that take your money, is experiencing loss, daily loss, according to reports. So if this is the case, because what most people did, everything's expensive. So what you do is you go to a Costco. I'm not advertising for Costco. You go to a Sam's Club. I'm not advertising for Sam's Club. But you go to one of these places and you buy your coffee. It can be even Starbucks coffee in bulk. And then you make it at home. So you don't have to stop in the morning and spend $5 to $6 a day, and then a lunch, and then a breakfast, sandwich, which starts to jack you up to around 12, 13, and you're doing that every day. And in this economy, that's just straight up expensive, or considered expensive. Coffee Bean is experiencing something similar, but Coffee Bean did not change its policy. Coffee Bean, more of a West Coast location. For those of you in Los Angeles or anybody in California, you can see Coffee Beans are also in existence. You can still go in there, and they did not change a thing. They did not want to discriminate, and they made it very clear during that time when Starbucks was saying, oh, we're going to diversify if the law is being used inappropriately. They didn't have to do that because they weren't doing that in the first place. There was no abusive policies in that way. Well, Starbucks lets you know right away that, in my opinion, wasn't sincere. Why would you change the policy now that you're experiencing a financial loss in a time where there is a loss? Maybe people use the Wi-Fi because it is, difficult to have a computer at home. Maybe, there's other reasons why people go. It's closer. Maybe the location is closer. Maybe it's, you don't know why. But what Starbucks put first were their profits. They said they do not want people in there using the Wi-Fi if you're not drinking coffee. After several years of saying the opposite, but they said they did it out of the kindness of their heart, when really maybe their profits were well at the time. So I took issue with that because it was under false pretenses. They took that rule away because financially they were doing well at the time. It didn't have anything to do with the fact that it was a policy that was being abused by their employees, in my opinion. All right, done with that. Let's talk about this trial. We're talking about West Virginia versus NATALIE. Now I'm going to versus NATALIE Cochran. I'm going to give an overview in this video, and then we're going to start doing breakdowns because they already had opening arguments. We've already sort of been introduced to the defense and the prosecution, to the backstory that involves this murder. Now, the murder is of Michael Cochran, which was, at the time, NATALIE Cochran's husband. She murders her husband. Allegedly at this point because she hasn't been convicted. But let's go into some details of how this past history with these two people actually starts to apply to the murder in this trial. To the this trial for murder. It starts with financial documents. Now, you hear me have explained these schemes multiple times. You have heard me talk about a Ponzi scheme. I even broke down who Charles Ponzi was and how Madoff sort of replicated this, and this scheme named after Charles Ponzi, who was the originator of having successfully executed this. I'll say it that way. It was kind of going on. It was called something else, a robbing Peter to pay Paul type of scenario. But it turned into what would be called the Charles Ponzi scheme, or just Ponzi scheme for short. There's a Ponzi scheme involved with these two people. Now, one of the defendant originally pleaded guilty in 2021 for fraud, and it involved this, what would ultimately be a Ponzi scheme. These victims, this is why it is, I mean, you have to get into the heads of these two individuals. That includes the victim and his wife, depending upon the extent of how far they went into it. But two of the victims included Michael Cochran's parents. You do a Ponzi scheme on your parents. I don't even know where your mind is, what you would even call that to be okay. But they did. And they also did their friends. Allegedly their friends, because you're not a real friend if you're scamming me out of money. I don't qualify you as a friend at that point. Now, while the husband lied dying, according allegedly by the hands of the defendant, she was still preparing documents, allegedly, according to the prosecution, to continue the Ponzi scheme. I mean, you can't write this stuff. You can't get any better than writing this. I mean, this is absolutely ridiculous. This is the same woman that was actually convicted, got 135 days in prison, because of this Ponzi scheme. She actually was found guilty. And the question becomes, for the trial of the murder, it goes for the defense motive, right? For the prosecution, it is clearly being used in two ways. One, as a motive, but two, also to show the extent of the defendant's involvement and ability to hide from the victim, allegedly, this fraud, for lack of a better description. Because when you go over to the defense's side, remember, we've already had opening arguments, we've already seen witnesses, we've already sort of started this trial, and they're relying pretty heavily on stating as if it really made a difference. And in my opinion, it's not going to sway the judge, the jury, or anybody else in there, that the victim himself had a heavy involvement, if not was the main person that had to do with this fraud. Now, what is the hope is of the defense is that it knocks a hole in motive for them. It sort of weakens the case, if you will, of the prosecution by making it seem that they don't have a legit motive. Because they're saying she was trying to hide, these documents from him, and he wasn't really involved in it. And this is sort of where they're saying the prosecution is trying to tell you. But they're saying absolutely not. He was the main person, and they're actually retrying the fraud case. Which, if I were the prosecution, I'd stop that pretty quickly. Or you can let him bury himself with this information, because it's not going to be here nor there as into whether or not she actually murdered this guy, because the fraud case has already been determined. This is not a pending case. This is a case that they have been tried and convicted on. Meaning the defendant has been tried and convicted on, whose husband was also a part of that investigation at the time. So to retry it, he's sort of leaping, in my opinion. He has to have something to sort of weaken the prosecution's case, because as it stands at this point, she seems cold and calculated enough, if you just go by what the prosecution is going to allege in this case, or saying in this case, to be able to commit this murder. That's how it's coming across without you actually getting full-on details as you do in a trial with this case. The case is very interesting because it shows layers of criminal activity. Most of the time, even if they're not caught, criminals layer their activities. They generally don't just do one crime. And for some people, it's like smokers. They can get a cancer scare and they'll still smoke again. It's the same thing for a criminal, somewhat in my opinion, that they can't, it's almost like they can't stop. They don't know anything else. So to stop means you have to go back to being a regular person, and that's not what they wanted in the first place. So you have this woman that not only had scammed her husband's family, her friends, anybody that had any money, she didn't care. She scammed them, allegedly, right? According to the prosecution's case. Actually go to the point of actually killing and committing murder, possibly. To the point where she gets indicted, because you don't just go on a whim to trial for murder. You have to be indicted like anything else, right? So you're not going to just, they murdered her, we think she did, suddenly we have a trial. Doesn't work like that. You have a trial before that to see if there's enough to bring you to trial for this charge. And she passed the test, because here she is in trial for the murder of her husband. Now, this is not to say that she will be convicted, but if we're just listening to what I've heard so far, because I had to go back over all of the testimony and all of the things that they had done up until this point, she's looking pretty guilty. I'm just going to go ahead and say it. So if the defense needs to change up some stuff, he's going to have to change. Part of that is with all, I think, defense people, except for very few exceptions. I'll say the one case where the woman was so attractive, she was distracting in the courtroom. She actually was not ended up being convicted. But stuff like that, a celebrity, something distracting enough to get the jurors or the judge to feel like they can make an exception in this case, even if it is subconsciously, right? Okay, so she does not have any of these. She's not she actually, I won't say she's not affluent, because I believe she's a doctor. Or she is she's a pharmacist? Let me go in and check this on my old school notes, because I generally use my old school notes. Well, I believe she's a pharmacist or something like that. She's some sort of medical professional in that sense, where she financially, you would think, didn't really need to do a Ponzi scheme. But sometimes for some people it's not enough. So we don't know. We don't want to try and convict her. But we also know an interesting part about the background of this case is that she originally was prosecuted, or was set to be tried in October of 23. But, she was, not in October 23, 2021 in November. And then it was cleverly, I say, when you get out of stuff like this, cleverly, sort of delayed, because they needed more to exhume the body of the victim to be able to get, some sort of cause of death type scenario, according to her attorneys. It did not work, because she was re-indicted on October 23rd. And then somebody says, it was at the request of the prosecutor, by the way, originally. They needed more information. But anyways, it didn't work, however, because she was re-indicted, she meaning the defendant, on October 23rd. And that's how we end up getting to this point where NATALIE Cochran is actually up for trial in West Virginia, where the murder took place. Let's see. So I have an interest in this trial, because is enough? This is one of those trials where you go, why did this even happen? What was this woman, if she was, even participating in a Ponzi scheme being done by her husband? If it was her husband that was primarily doing the Ponzi scheme because she could afford to live without, if the allegations are true, why, how did he end up being murdered? You have to ask yourself these questions, right? Because you're saying, well, everything in this case kind of doesn't make sense. Why was she found and convicted of fraud if her husband was actually the primary person? And if he was the primary person, or if she was the primary person, then why is the defense now saying she wasn't? So you sort of, it's a case that has a history of raising questions. Uses a lot of legal tricks, because if you look at the cases so far, if you go on and you look at what's been presented in this trial so far by the defense, you'll actually look and see that it's almost it's almost like legal tricks, but visible ones. Everybody, I'm sure, uses legal tricks. Not everyone, but defense attorneys have a tendency to do that because they have the guilty client, right? Or the defendant, right? They have the person that's going to be, convicted. But to this extent, it means you've been doing it a long time. So he's a little abstract, I think her attorney is, and he's really good at finding an argument. You can tell that he has a talent for that, because he's finding an argument and it's almost making people think it makes sense. But if you really listen to what he's saying, it doesn't matter. It's smoke and mirrors so far. So I'm going to watch it. We're going to watch it. We're going to keep track of it. We're going to see what's happening. I love cases like this that just have a bunch of layers to it that just sort of keep coming out. We talked about just the fact that if this is true, I can't even, there was a time, one of the witnesses speaks of a time where she's talking on the phone to this defendant, to NATALIE Cochran. And she says that the husband was allegedly, quote unquote, passed out on the floor, because those are her words. The defendant's words say that he's passed out on the floor. Although it's questionable as to whether or not he was actually dead, but we don't know. At this point, according to the witness. And she says, well, I'm just going to let him sleep it off instead of taking him to the hospital. Which strikes the witness and the people listening in the courtroom as odd. This is your husband. Why are you not at least checking for a pulse here so we can see if the man is actually breathing? So it's that kind of stuff that, even though it's not presented that way, it can easily translate that way inside the courtroom. Because if you're just listening to this and you're not falling for the smoke and mirrors, you're just looking for the legal parts of it, you're just kind of going, wait, what does that do? It makes her look cold and calculating, capable of committing this crime. They're very good and given enough evidence to actually kill her credibility without her even speaking a word yet. All right, so pay attention. Make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. This is going to be one I'm going to talk about just because of the layers. I'd like to see how they're going to use her past, how the prosecution is going to sort of combat some of this, and then what other creative things this defense attorney actually comes up with, because you can tell that his brain doesn't sort of process and function the same way as you would normally. So it's not going to be regular run-of-the-mill stuff. This is going to be some stuff that, you kind of go, what? Where is this coming from? All right, thank you so much. Make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. Check out my fan base. You can still see my stuff on TikTok. Maybe not. I don't know. I haven't checked it. But all of the new stuff will go on to the fan base page. All right. Thank you so much. I'll see you guys next time.